thank you for joining. We're going to go ahead and kick things off. Um, a few things before we jump into this. For those of you who are looking for closed captions, you can click that closed captions option and that will pop up for you. As far as the chat goes, continue to introduce yourself, say hello. That's going to be the purpose of the chat for this. For anyone with questions, we really want to encourage you to use the Q&A section, because it's not only what I'm going to use to kind of go over and summarize some questions at the end of time with our guest, but it's also going to be what we, the team, are going throughout this to try to address questions as we go. There's some contact information here, the team email, as well as more information on this, but say hello in the chat. We're going to get started with this right now. And a reminder, all the Q&A stuff, we will do our best to answer as many questions as we get during this. I will summarize them at the end, try to cover as many. And then if there are any lingering questions, you can either reach out to us directly or we can cover that via email back to you. You can go ahead and advance it. All right, quick little blurb about Artwork Archive for those of you who aren't familiar. We began in 2010 as one of the first cloud-based inventory management systems. We provide tools to collectors, institutions of all type to digitize, manage, and share and preserve their collections. It's accessible for personal small collections and powerful enterprise corporations as well. We strive to be more powerful than a spreadsheet and more accessible than any kind of one-time downloadable programs. Anybody interested in learning more about Artwork Archive, we can go over this at some other time, and you guys can obviously reach out to us directly, because I want to jump into our guest here and kick this off. Okay, I'm Justin Anthony. I'm one of the founders of Artwork Archive, and today I am joined by Dyani Feige. As Director of Preservation Services, she works with libraries, archives, museums, and other cultural organizations to conduct needs and risk assessments, assist in disaster planning, and helps develop policy and planning documents for collections. She also develops and presents education programs on preservation and conservation concerns. So we're really happy to have her joining us here. And without further ado, I will kick it over to you, Dyani. And you can start, and then I will be in the background trying to cover questions as best I can.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Justin, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today. As he mentioned, my name's Dyani Feige. I'm the Director of Preservation Services at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. I am going to turn off my camera for most of the presentation, but I'll pop the camera back on at the end for questions. But to just let you know a little bit more about the organization that I come from, the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. We are a nonprofit organization. We're based in Philadelphia, but we work all over the country and a bit internationally as well. It's very cool to see the international representation we have in the audience today. So we have two kind of main functions. We have a paper conservation lab where expert conservators do treatment, stabilization, and housing for anything and everything paper-based. So everything from kind of historic paper predecessors like parchment and papyrus onto archival materials, art on paper, photographic materials, books, and basically, if there is a paper component, our conservators will work on it. We have a digital imaging department in which our team does scanning and creates facsimiles. We have a housing and framing department for packaging the objects that come through the lab. And then finally, my department, Preservation Services, we are really the education and outreach wing of the organization. So Justin mentioned some of the types of the work that I do, but basically we work with organizations and individuals to help train them in collections care and management practices, And we also work directly with collecting entities to help them identify preservation needs and put together plans for moving forward. Next slide. So this is just a little bit of it's a lot to get through in the time that we have, but this is just a little bit of an overview of what we are going to talk about today. We're primarily talking about so I work mostly with collecting organizations, that is museums, libraries, archives, historic sites, etc. So some of the content here is geared more toward the kind of institutional, organizational setting, but I think it's the vast majority of it is applicable to all different types of collections, whether it's family, personal collections in your home, collections of an artist or art entity in a studio space or gallery, etc. Next slide. So, housekeeping is one of those topics where it's really helpful to think of it as a marathon and not a sprint. What I mean by that is that housekeeping is an ongoing responsibility, and it really works best when it's woven into your ongoing schedule and practices in the long term, as opposed to bursts of cleaning up here and there. There are a lot of things to think about in housekeeping, and the reality for most sites or collections, regardless of resources, is that it can be difficult to execute a perfect housekeeping plan. Time and resources are limited, and the dust will always come back, probably before you even finish cleaning that one gallery. But that doesn't mean that we disregard it. At CCAHA, the Conservation Center, we talk about this a lot in the assessment work that we do with organizations and collections. The goal is not to let the idea of the best prevent you from working toward conditions that are good or better than they were. And so hopefully today we'll highlight some of the achievable actions that can help you do that with a housekeeping program. So, simply put, a regular housekeeping program is essential to the preservation of collections. Having clean conditions is important for long-term collections care, and it has many other kind of secondary benefits, including improving your emergency preparedness. Dust, dirt, and debris can not only accumulate and cause damage to collections items kind of themselves in the moment, but it can also complicate collection salvage operations in the event of, for example, a water emergency. Good housekeeping practices are also very relevant for other key parts of an organization or collections work, including exhibitions, security, facilities, and operations. And it's especially crucial for your pest management efforts and preventing and detecting infestations and mold outbreaks, which can cause serious damage to collections and be a health hazard to individuals as well. Next slide. Thank you. We often talk about protecting collections on three broad cascading levels, and it might be helpful to think of this as similar to a nesting doll. So first, there's the building level, then the enclosure level, and finally the object itself within the box or folder. Housekeeping practices in place help strengthen all three levels and is an important part of the many, often interrelated steps we can take to promote good long-term health and safety for collections. In thinking about more specific ways that housekeeping can help to protect collections, the 10 agents of deterioration, which you see listed here, are a really helpful framework to keep that in mind. So if you're not familiar with the 10 agents of deterioration, I highly recommend seeking out a little more information about them. This is basically the 10 different forces that can act on objects to cause deterioration. So just to list them out, they're physical forces, theft and vandalism, fire, water, pests, pollutants, light, incorrect temperature, incorrect relative humidity, and custodial neglect, which is the one kind of less physical force, but is the concept of having an incomplete inventory, not having thorough information about your collections and collections practices. So basically not working with a system like Artwork Archive. But the idea is that anything that can damage collections can in some way fit into these 10 agents. These categories help us more clearly identify ways to block or reduce harmful forces and lower the risk of damage to collections. Housekeeping is a really heavy hitter in the fight against the 10 agents of deterioration because honestly, in some ways, it helps to combat all 10 of them. Some of these are a little more obvious, some of them somewhat indirect, but having a regular housekeeping program helps to mitigate directly against things like pests and pollutants, and indirectly for some of the other agents, in part by bringing increased monitoring and observation of collections that help us make adjustments when conditions are not ideal. When we talk about mitigating strategies against the agents and the risks they pose to collections, having a good housekeeping program in place comes up time and time again. So this is just another way to answer the question of why housekeeping is important. One pollutant that probably comes first to many of our minds, and we all deal with every day, I promise, is dust. Dust is a major part of why we want to do regular routine housekeeping that includes the key steps of dusting and vacuuming. Dust is made up of a variety of organic and inorganic materials, some of which we can see and some of which we can't. And that includes pollen, sand, human skin and hair, other creatures' skin and hair, paper and textile fibers, dirt, road dust, and millions of dust mites. In addition to being unsightly and giving the appearance that maybe we are being neglectful in caring for collections, dust can cause many harmful issues from a preservation standpoint. For example, the organic elements in dust particles in particular can attract water vapor and create a microclimate of increased relative humidity around an object, which can accelerate its deterioration. Basically, dust or elements of dust can absorb water. It gives the water something more to cling to. Dust can also be a food source for mold and other pests. Mold will grow on organic objects themselves, but that includes dust that has organic materials within it. So a perfectly clean surface of a book might be more susceptible to growing mold on it if it has a perfectly clean surface of a book would be less susceptible to growing mold on it than a surface of a book with even a light coating of dust on the surface. It just, again, it gives one more kind of layer to attack. If you need motivation to go dust in collection storage areas, maybe that fact will help. A pile of dust is gross, but a pile of dust with mold on it is extra gross. So moving on, just to kind of go back a little bit and better define what exactly we are talking about, it can help to distinguish between housekeeping that is done with collections and other types of cleaning activities. For the purpose of this program, let's call those custodial. Housekeeping is work that's done in collection spaces and with collections themselves. It can include a variety of activities that we'll get a little bit more into in a few minutes, like dusting and vacuuming collections, both on display or in storage, wiping down display and storage furniture, cleaning within the exhibition spaces themselves. Housekeeping with collections is what we call a preventive activity. It's done to help prevent damage and slow inevitable deterioration of collections. Custodial cleaning, on the other hand, typically refers to cleaning in more public spaces, or for more for honestly kind of the human interest in a space rather than the collections. But in a building like hallways, restrooms, staff offices, and it does not typically interact with collections. In that sense, housekeeping and custodial cleaning can seem very different, but the two definitely overlap and the boundaries can be blurry. And of course, inevitably, at many sites, organizations, the same staff might be doing both types of housekeeping. And there are often projects where if you have separate staff, collection staff and custodial staff or contractors will work together to clean a space. The housekeeping that happens with the collections and the custodial activities that happen in the spaces all around them both contribute to the overall housekeeping and cleaning program for an organization. So, what is a housekeeping plan? We know kind of conceptually what housekeeping is, of course, but how are we going to actually, rather than just committing to doing the work of housekeeping, how are we going to lay a path forward to implement this? Well, if you know me or if you work with me in other contexts around collections care, you will know that I am a real stickler for having plans in place. And this area is no exception. A housekeeping plan is a document that outlines the actions, frequency, methods, and materials used in your housekeeping activities. Having this plan in place helps make sure that the housekeeping policies and procedures are clear and can be followed by the designated staff or volunteer roles. And this helps with institutional memory and promotes quality long-term collections care. Having a plan in place will make it clear who is responsible for what tasks, which helps to reduce staff frustration and confusion. The plan will also ensure that there is some written record of what was done to the collections, when and by whom. So what the plan actually looks like, it will kind of articulate your collection spaces and your collection, which is, of course, our facility today, or our focus today, but it also looks at the entire facility and the landscape. As we talked about in the levels portion of this, the building envelope of your facility is really the first outer line of defense against the forces like pests, pollutants, and the elements, which all, of course, have a direct effect on your cleaning program. The same goes for the landscape. It will be easier to keep collections and interior spaces clean if your grounds crew are working with you to reduce the dirt and pests that can make their way into your buildings. Obviously, this is something that can vary from site to site, and I don't think there's really one right way to carve that up, as long as the tasks and responsibilities are clearly outlined. So, if you're from a very small organization or you're not representing a collecting organization, take the words grounds crew and just kind of replace them with whoever is actually responsible for the exterior maintenance. It's also important to note that a housekeeping plan, like other essential policies and procedures, is a document that should be revisited often to make sure it stays in line with one, the mission and staffing structure of the organization, and two, the current scholarship in collections care and the standards for methods and materials. It doesn't happen terribly frequently, but it absolutely does happen. Standards and recommendations change. So something that maybe we were doing 30 years ago might now we recognize that in fact that type of chemical does indeed impact collections in a way that we didn't realize before. So yeah, staying on top of continuing to be an informed practitioner and collection steward. So the plan should outline the frequency and schedule for cleaning activities in your collection space. It will also note the cleaning products or methods or techniques that are acceptable for use. It might also outline what is not acceptable for use. We'll more on that in a moment. The plan should address procedures for housekeeping in all types of spaces that have collections. So again, if you're not at a collecting institution, take what I'm about to say and kind of adapt it as necessary. But for example, in a museum, the housekeeping plan would include both exhibition and storage areas. And these include the shelving and furniture in use. A housekeeping plan can also include protocols for staff to report damage, both to collections, objects, and the building. We talked earlier about how housekeeping can have, just as a practice, can have these kind of indirect benefits and mechanisms for information. One of those is if you are moving through your spaces on a routine enough basis to be doing regular routine housekeeping, you might notice problems, issues a lot sooner than you would if you don't have that kind of routine protocol in place. It's important that the housekeeping plan is based on your site or collection's actual needs, not what you think the needs are or should be. So if you have a reading room that is less frequently accessed, that space might require less frequent cleaning than other spaces that get a lot of traffic. Similarly, housekeeping should reflect the seasonal rhythms and timeline of your site. If you have spaces that are more active in certain times of the year and so need additional attention in those months, keep the plan rooted in the specifics of your organization. And that can include, more in-depth activities that are seasonal and require closing a space while the work is being done. So the next few slides are just some schedule thoughts, recommendations. And I forget if we said this already, but when we send out the recording, when our work archive sends out the recording, they'll be sending a copy of the presentation as well. So you will have all of the text to refer to. Apologies if I didn't mention that previously. I know some of these slides have a good deal of text on them, but anyway, an essential part of that housekeeping plan is a schedule that outlines the tasks and frequency at which they are done. It probably goes without saying, there are a lot of benefits to having this regular written schedule in place. It can make sure that you hit all corners of the collections. This model that you'll see on the next few slides, this is a very general model, and there are tasks that might be more or less relevant to your situation. But you could take a schedule like this and build it up, shift things around as it makes sense for your site, etc. Again, housekeeping tasks will vary a lot depending on the size, use, and type of collections involved, and of course, of the resources available, like your staffing structure. When you create a schedule, I think it's very important to be realistic about what you and your colleagues, if you have them, can accomplish, because that will help you stick to the schedule and not delay, defer things. You might want to emphasize tasks that impact larger chunks of your collection, or, as we mentioned, areas that receive more use. So, all that is to say, it's not terribly helpful to have a schedule in place if you're not going to be trying to stick to it to some extent. So on the last slide, we saw kind of more frequent activities. This is moving on to some ideas for monthly, quarterly, semi-annual tasks. Apologies, some of the formatting is a little off on these slides. Disregard that line in the middle, but dusting and vacuuming are really leading motifs because they accomplish so much in reducing dust and dirt and promoting healthy collections. A practice like wet mopping is usually something that's done on a minimal and targeted basis in collection spaces, like, for example, a gallery and exhibit space. For example, after particularly busy weekends. So remember, this is what we are talking about is simply the housekeeping that's going on around the collections. I'm not saying don't mop your public spaces. But mopping introduces water, and it can quickly raise the relative humidity in a space. So that's one thing we don't want usually. And of course, we want to avoid oversaturated mops that risk splashing water onto collections. Note that with boxes and other enclosures that are housing the objects, there are dusting tasks for the outside, the box itself, and that's generally going to be the more important action, but it might include the insides of an enclosure as needed. So storing items in a box or any enclosure greatly reduces the amount of dust that would get through. This is one of the many reasons that we highly recommend storage enclosures, but it won't keep all particles away from your object. So that's where monitoring and your housekeeping plan comes into play. And this applies to casework, exhibition casework as well, especially if you have cases that don't fully lock or seal. Dust, dirt, pests, and pollutants can get in through those cracks. So the interiors need to be routinely checked and cleaned as needed. And lastly, some possible annual tasks. Certainly, monitoring collection spaces, doing those walkthroughs and inspecting collections is a critically important part of housekeeping and beneficial to your overall collections care activities. Again, I'll just reiterate, when you're working in collection spaces and directly with objects on a scheduled basis, you're more likely to notice if something is amiss. And regular monitoring is key to catching problems at an early phase so they don't become bigger and often more expensive to deal with. This becomes very important in a practice like pest management. Monitoring is a huge part of having an integrated pest management plan in place, so you are able to notice issues and problems as they might result rather than have to be reactive after the fact. So really, monitoring is an ongoing task, and it could be that you have annual inspections that are more intensive, and or it could be that you are implementing monitoring on kind of a rotating basis. So working with one room at a time per season or month or however you want to carve it up. Again, having even collections that are stored in nice archival materials and boxes and in secure and stable environments can have problems like pests and pollutants sneak in. So being vigilant makes you a responsible steward for your collections. A housekeeping log can be used. Oh, sorry, can you go back? Thank you. Housekeeping log can be used to document the activities on your schedule. This is a form that you can use to track what was done to the collection, when, and by whom. Recording the actions taken is a really helpful policy for several reasons, including that it helps guard against collections being unnecessarily handled or over cleaned. I have heard the kind of premise that housekeeping should be vigilant and careful, but not rigorous. We want to avoid excessive handling and overcleaning because that brings increased risk for damage. So here again, the format of a housekeeping log can vary, but you can see this is pretty simple, straightforward. Usually it will include columns for the location, the task, the date it was done, the individual responsible for the action, and notes. There could be other categories that are useful to include for your site. This particular form was shared by the Minnesota Historical Society in their Historic Housekeeping Handbook, which you can find online. There will be a link to that in the resource page. This is a really excellent resource, by the way. But the log is sort of a quick reference record, and certainly for more involved housekeeping projects, maybe with a particular heavily trafficked gallery or an important object, it might be helpful to write up a separate report for more intensive practices. The important thing, the bottom line, is to note what was done and to make sure that your staff are aware of the protocol and how to document the work. We can move on now. Thank you. So now we are going to look at some of the supplies and equipment used in collections housekeeping. A strong housekeeping plan makes use of materials, supplies, and equipment that are considered appropriate for preservation. There are a lot of good resources available to guide you in this. The Conservation Center has a number of other resources on our website, which I'll link to in a bit. And, proceed with caution because there are some bad resources out there as well. So I'm going to be taking a bit of a detour to talk about what to look for in supplies and materials. But we certainly don't want to use products and supplies that risk bringing harm to the collection. So this is a really important topic to think about in creating your housekeeping plan. Next slide, please. Thank you. So if you have purchased anything collections related, from dusting cloths to shelving for your collection, you know that there are a lot of choices out there. In professional conservation and preservation work, the term archival is often used to denote materials that are chemically stable and will not produce harmful byproducts. Though this is something that you may have heard by now, it's worth repeating that even though this word is used frequently, I think I used it earlier in this presentation itself, the word archival itself carries absolutely no true technical meaning when it's out there in the commercial world. You may see materials described as being archival, quote unquote, or museum quality in advertising for preservation supplies and art supplies, and that can be misleading. You don't see this word quite as much anymore, but I often use the example of light in food marketing. If you're looking for something that's low fat or low calorie, look for those words. Light has very little meaning other than as a marketing term. So knowing what other specific manufacturing terms mean is going to be more valuable than relying on that catch-all of archival when you're shopping for supplies. It's really smart to check the product descriptions and even contact the manufacturers if something is not stated or are unclear. So these are just, again, there are other resources that go into a lot of information on specific terms to look for, but again, the formatting got a little wonky with the graphics, but some of the other terms that actually do carry technical meaning are lignin-free, acid-free, buffered or unbuffered. PAT, this is a technical test that materials that are coming directly in contact with photographic materials are recommended to have passed. So if you see something that has this little graphic PAT passed on it, that is excellent for storing photographic materials. And then the multiple P's of the plastics, if you are just buying something that is plastic, you don't necessarily know what you're getting. Polyester, polyethylene, and polypropylene are the plastics that are most likely to be inert and safe for direct contact with collections materials. But again, this is just a little bit of a sidestep. So if you're interested, definitely reach out to me separately or look up other resources along the same lines. Suitable housekeeping supplies can come from a wide range of sources. You certainly aren't limited to ordering everything from specialized library and museum supply vendors. And this is yet another reason why it's really helpful to be an informed consumer and do the homework to make sure that what you're using is of appropriate quality. If you are, shopping at a craft or fabric store, or certainly art supply stores, if using the example of paper, if a paper is acid-free, lignin-free, they will want to say that on the packaging. So knowing the specific terms to look for can be helpful, very helpful. Next slide, please. Cleaning products themselves can be a sneaky source of pollutants that can harm collections. So it's also very important to take a look at the products you're using themselves and determine if you can avoid or replace any products with ones that are less harmful. This, again, is from that Minnesota Historical Society resource. It is a bit dated in years at this point, but it's still a really great resource. But getting back to some specifics, for example, cleaning solutions that include ammonia and peroxides should not be used around collections objects. Dusting and vacuuming are kind of our focus today. So I wanted to mention the dusting devices listed here. Feather dusters are not recommended for use with or around collections for a couple different reasons. The rough quills themselves can scratch surfaces of collections, but also feather dusters tend to throw a lot of particles back into the air, which we really don't want. It's not clean. It's maybe moving the dust around, but it's not actually cleaning it up. Instead, we recommend light dusting with microfiber or other dust cloths, and natural hair brushes that are usually preferred instead. Swiffer dusters can be perfectly fine for certain objects and materials. With any dusting project, though, you want to first look at what is being dusted and let the condition of the surface inform what you use. Is it a piece of furniture with a rough surface that a duster might snag on, so you need to go another route? And of course, you want to always keep an eye on how clean your duster itself is. When your duster gets dirty, change it or clean it to avoid spreading dirty particles around. Next slide. One of the top things that we often talk about in cleaning collection spaces is vacuuming. So vacuums are definitely one of the most important tools in a collections housekeeper's toolkit. Gentle vacuuming is a great first step in housekeeping or any cleaning because it helps make sure that we're not pushing the dust and particles into the surface of the object and causing more damage. Normal household vacuums can be totally fine for certain housekeeping tasks, but it's important to keep that vacuum restricted for those uses. We really want to avoid cross-contamination and having the vacuum spit out dust, dirt, debris onto the objects and spaces you're trying to clean. So directly for collections, this is a big reason that we recommend using vacuums with a HEPA filter, HEPA. HEPA stands for High Efficiency Particulate Air. They are very effective at trapping particles so they can be safely disposed. So when a when a household vacuum vacuums up particles, it blows them back into the air. I mean, of course, it traps many of them, but it is in no way holding on to everything that it vacuums up. A vacuum with a HEPA filter, on the other hand, it picks up the big stuff in its body and it filters out the smaller particles within the filter themselves. They typically remove something between 97 and 99% of particles down to 0.3 microns in size, very tiny. So they do a very good job. It's important if you're using HEPA filters to replace them on either the schedule recommended by the manufacturer or after larger or messier projects too. So keep the cost of replacement filters and parts in mind when you're scoping out a vacuum and building a budget. It's also helpful to purchase a vacuum with variable speed control for housekeeping with objects. This helps you control the level of suction based on the task at hand. And there are all sorts of helpful attachments out there. You can get something called a micro tool kit. You can see some of the micro tools on the top left image. These are good for targeting nooks and crannies, something like the gutter of a book, small areas with gentle, delicate vacuum suction. With objects like delicate or lightweight textiles, and with many other types of objects, some furnitures, certain types of work on paper with a very fragile or flaky surface, we typically want to use a canister vacuum and the lowest suction possible. A common sense tip, but make sure you test the suction on your hand or another safe surface before moving to the actual work surface or the object. To further cut back the power of the suction and reduce the chances of actually having the vacuum grab or damage the object, you can also vacuum through a screen. So you can do that either with a fabric like cheesecloth or muslin directly over the nozzle of the vacuum. Another option, especially helpful for textiles, is to create an actual small, flat, separate screen made of fiberglass or polyester. This really reduces the chance that you'll vacuum up loose threads, decoration like beads, etc. So in these images here, you can see the screen itself is resting lightly on the object, and the individuals are holding the vacuum nozzle a little bit above the screen, not pressing it down onto there. always be cautious. If you're in doubt about whether you can or should vacuum an object or surface, or if you have concerns about the object's materials or condition, definitely speak with a conservator before taking action. Um, we at the Conservation Center, I can't speak for every conservator, but we are always happy to take questions. We don't charge for time for questions. These are just some kind of action shots of folks working with vacuums in situ. You can see that they have HEPA vacuums that come in an actual backpack configuration, so you can move around and use them for cleaning exhibits where the canister would be harder to work with. It's a little easier to see in the top image, but in both the top image and the one to the left, with the sculpture, or excuse me, the one below, in each of these images, they're using a dusting brush to gently dislodge the dust and guide it into the vacuum. And this brings us to kind of the last section on supplies here, and that is on dusting itself. Using a soft brush for dusting objects, either alone or in conjunction with vacuuming, is another cleaning method that can be really central to collections housekeeping. There are many types of brushes that can work for various purposes, and there's just a few styles shared here. But basically, these are washable brushes. You can reuse them. The ones in the top images are great for light dusting of small objects. They might be called bamboo, Japanese, or Chinese hake brushes, Hake. These are very soft, and you can easily see, because of the color of the soft bristles, when they become dirty and so might need to be cleaned. Natural bristles are preferred in dusting objects, and these have traditionally been made from the hair of hogs, sheep, goats, and many other animals as well. For the just the kind of lowest cost option, you can buy makeup brushes, just in a drugstore or in a wherever makeup is sold. It's not, it's not going to be quite as gentle, and you certainly don't know that you're dealing with natural bristles, but it is an option for getting started. And they do obviously, of course, make makeup brushes that are very soft. Okay, next slide, and this is kind of the closing in on the end here, and we'll have a bit of time for questions. Thinking back to the nesting dolls and the levels of protection for collections, so at the building level, the enclosure level, and the object level, there are many steps we can take to help support our housekeeping work and reduce some of the dust and dirt from getting in there in the first place. Next slide, please. The first step is really one of the biggest, keeping your building envelope well sealed. So for this, we're looking at keeping windows and doors in good condition, replacing broken and damaged components like weather stripping, monitoring top to bottom, roof to foundation for gaps or damage. This is, of course, going to be really massive in keeping out dust, dirt, pollutants, pests, and the elements, and keeping inside climate control. Dust covers can be a super way to protect your storage shelving and objects that are too large to place in boxes themselves. These images here are Tyvek covers on a storage shelving at the New York Public Library. Tyvek is a lightweight, durable polyethylene material that is resistant to tearing and mold. It protects nicely against dust and light while still being easy to move aside for access. Muslin is another option that's available, and often less pricey. And another point I want to call out is to get collections off the floor, ideally at least 4 to 6 inches. Getting objects off the floor is, among other things, a huge step in mitigating against flood damage, but it also helps free up space for you to see underneath and clean underneath the object or box as part of your housekeeping. Slide. We did talk a bit along the way about keeping objects in enclosures is another great step. Enclosures do all sorts of positive things, adding a barrier layer against forces like dust and pollutants, fluctuations in temperature and relative humidity, and pests. Placing floor mats at public entry spaces is a pretty easy thing to do, and they can greatly reduce the amount of dirt that might come into the building. It's really important, of course, that these mats be cleaned regularly so they can do their job. Using something like sticky mats at the entrances to collection storage is another cool trick that some sites use. Coat checks obviously have concerns with space and security, maybe staffing, but coats are an extra source for particulates. We tend to wash our coats less frequently than the clothes we wear day to day. So they will bring in more stuff. If you're in if your collection is going on exhibit, using display cases as much as possible is really helpful in keeping dust off of objects. And a similar point with installations is to consider moving objects further back in the display to help cut back on the dust that is coming in with visitors and maybe hopping onto the objects. And then last, but in no way least, here's where I hopefully sound like a broken record in saying that monitoring collections and collection spaces on a regular basis is an absolutely vital part of housekeeping. So this is just, there are a lot of really great and free resources, sample forms and plans online that I would definitely highly recommend you checking out. We are running low on time, so I'm not going to go through these, but definitely if you have questions about anything in particular, encourage you to reach out to me. And that is the end of my presentation. So
Great.
yes,
That was
this
a
is,
lot to cover
yes, I know.
in that short, and I think you did a great job. I want to remind, a lot of people are asking, are those slides coming out? Will these resources be sent? Just a reminder, we're going to get that out to all of you within the next day or so on that. There were some questions coming in. Did you have any other final things you wanted to cover before I jumped into some of those?
Only my urging to all of you to please reach out to me with any further questions. Happy to field the questions we can in the next few minutes. But yeah, my email is on the last slide. It's available on our website too. But yes. What questions? I think we
Sure.
probably got several. So what can
Well,
we
yeah, there was
tackle?
a couple things, a couple general themes that came in. So there was, you were referencing the log. Just for those of
Yes,
you that are using our work archive, we see people using both our schedule feature and the maintenance tracking feature to keep up with what needs to happen and what has happened,
great,
including all of the details you were going over. So we've got a built-in tool for that in the system. So for those of you
excellent.
who are asking about how to best use the platform for that, you can do that. The other questions, a couple of them were about cleaning microfiber brushes for
Hmm.
use with collection items. So let me just make sure I'm asking this correctly. So there were two kind of on that topic.
Mhm.
And it sounds like, yeah, do you have any tips on that front?
Yeah. So microfiber cloths and the
Cloth and the
natural
brushes,
hair
right?
and the natural hair brushes, those can be cleaned and reused. We just recommend cleaning them with just water and a neutral scent-free soap. Like, I mean, you can even just use like a scent-free, gentle laundry detergent or dish soap. You just clean them, thoroughly soak them and clean them out with a gentle soap, and then let them thoroughly dry, and then you are able to reuse them. I mean, with any of these, you can't, and this is common sense, but you can't keep reusing them forever. If they do start to appear at all discolored themselves, or starting to get raggedy, then toss them and get a new one. But yeah, you can reuse.
Okay. Let's see. Quick question on house vacuum with a HEPA filter. Is that as effective as some of the other things you were recommending? Can it be used in a pinch?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a, a, a vacuum is a vacuum. It's the where the difference gets in is with the filter itself, and with the level of suction from the nozzle. So absolutely. I mean, if you have a house vacuum that you are able to outfit with a HEPA filter, then absolutely, I
That's a good solution.
might want to try to see if there's a way to put it on a lower suction. I mean, I know the house vacuum I have, like, the lowest level of suction is pretty aggressive.
Aggressive.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Okay, a couple other kind of speed round things, and honestly, if some of these involve a lot more nuance or anything like that, we can encourage the people asking to go directly to you on this.
yeah,
But one person brought up question on mold and mildew. They just received several boxes that are not damp, but definitely have a certain smell to them. What would you recommend in a situation like that? Temporary plastic tote with baking soda, tote with dehumidifier packages inside to absorb the moisture. Any advice on, because some of these do have, we suspect moisture. What are some of the kind of moisture mitigation methods?
yeah. Well, I mean, one thing. This is a relatively new acquisition. I would definitely keep them away from your other collections. It doesn't have to be like fully in a separate room, but absolutely something like a plastic tote. You just want to avoid transporting anything that might be coming in from the outside to your the collections that you already have. As far as that mildewy odor can linger so long, it doesn't necessarily mean there is an active problem. So I think after you kind of isolate them, the next thing that I would do is just look very carefully through them to see if you can see any signs of what looks like actual mold on the surface. If you do find that, then you want to proceed pretty quickly to the next step of trying to address that and clean it up. But unfortunately, it is possible that the smell just lingers from, you know, I smell that smell so much, and I think like, oh, that's my grandparents' basement smell. Like,
Mhm.
stuff in their basement wasn't necessarily moldy. It just so yeah, I mean, this is starting to get into I could talk
Right,
for
where
a lot longer,
some of
but
these things can go further down the path. I think last question, for those of you who had some more detailed questions about particular materials and things like
yeah,
that, like the Renaissance wax and stuff, I recommend reaching out directly. One other kind of
yep,
general thing that might be interesting to the audience, because I think this is something we run into a lot of organizations dealing with, is how do you balance, like a lot of these organizations we work with, particularly smaller collecting institutions or nonprofits that have minimal staff? Do
sure.
you have any recommendations on overall, like how to balance that housekeeping, how to get it done, how to prioritize that stuff? Any kind of tips and tricks for those smaller staffs that may be kind of overwhelmed by all the things that they should be doing? Like, is there any, if you only do the following two things, jump on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is something that I talked about like pretty quickly, but I'll reiterate again. I mean, breaking things up into chunks is can go a long way to making the overall and like something you're able to move through one room at a time is going to feel more achievable and feasible than moving through the entire organization at a time. So if you're putting together a housekeeping plan, it doesn't have to be anything as detailed as some of the samples that are in the resources. It can just start as something as simple as, we are going to visit every room in our museum at least once a year, and we are going to do a thorough check to see if there are any major points of concern. Like starting somewhere like that is so much better than just feeling intimidated by the magnitude of the project and kind of
Sure.
shutting it down. So yeah, I
Okay.
mean, I could really advocate for the value of incremental improvement and change all day long. So yeah, I would say start small, see the big project, and carve it up into chunks. And I doing something is better than nothing.
All
Um,
right. Perfect. There are, as I mentioned, there are still questions
yeah,
trickling in. We're not going to be able to get to all of them because we're a little over time, but those slides will go out. They're also, Gianni put together some really helpful kind of tips and tricks and other reminders and helpful information and slides at the end. So stay tuned for those because I think they're going to be really beneficial to a lot of you. To our audience, thank you so much for taking time to check this out. Thank you again, Gianni, for you taking your valuable time to talk about something that's so important to so many of these individuals and institutions. And this last slide here is just a way you can get a hold of us as well if there's any follow-up questions regarding Artwork Archive or the platform. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.